You've called President Trump an idiot for his push to take control of Greenland, and you've said that Congress can't take any chances of allowing that to happen. You've met with the foreign ministers of both Denmark and Greenland this past week. How are they reacting to President Trump's threats?
Look, they're shocked, and they're trying to find reason within what's happening here. And I tried to explain to them there is no reasoning. Right, the president just wants to have a legacy piece where he gets to claim that he brought in this big chunk of land that he sees on the map, even though it's, distorted map. And he's willing to ruin our whole foreign policy, all of our alliances, our economy, just so he could get what he wants. This man is doing everything for himself and nothing for us. Even the idea of buying it, we're going to spend billions and billions of dollars, potentially $500 billion, which is never going to happen. But right now we can't even afford health insurance for U.S. citizens, and we're talking about buying land. And let me just say one more time, Denmark, the Kingdom of Denmark and Greenland has said, we will give you everything you want, short of giving you possession of our land. You want more bases, you get more bases. You want to put more people, you get it. The idea that we're going to waste money for everything we want is the dumbest decision we can make. The only person who can make a decision this dumb is someone that would actually let a casino go under. And guess who's president right now?
Congressman Don Bacon told me yesterday in the wake of the president's new tariff threats, quote, I and most Americans disagree with the president's heavy-handedness. He is threatening NATO members, which is shameful, unquote. Are you concerned that these actions are jeopardizing the NATO alliance?
Well, I think it's a question right now, Jake, not of what the president's trying to accomplish, but how. And I have concerns about
of the president's new tariff threats. I and most Americans disagree with the president's heavy-handedness. He is threatening NATO members, which is shameful. The concern is that these actions are jeopardizing the NATO alliance. It is a question right now, not of what the president's trying to accomplish, but how. There are concerns about using certain methods. The fictional part is a general confronting Trump to his face in some televised meeting and calling him a traitor while Trump flees the room. That did not happen. No major news outlet reported it. There is no official transcript. It is political fan fiction designed to dramatize real tensions. But the real part, that is where things get interesting, because we have documented conflicts between Trump and senior military officers. We have former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley warning about Trump's wannabe dictator tendencies. We have Trump calling Milley a traitor and suggesting he might deserve the death penalty over back-channel contacts with China. We have Pentagon officials expressing concerns about Trump recalling retired officers to try them for treason. We have senators from both parties pushing back on Trump's threats to use military force domestically without congressional approval. So while no general has publicly called Trump a traitor to his face, Trump has absolutely called generals traitors, and military leaders have absolutely warned about Trump's authoritarian tendencies and his willingness to misuse military power. The fictional pieces take these real tensions and flip them, creating a scenario where the general confronts Trump instead of the other way around. And that fictional reversal resonates with millions of people because it reflects what they wish would happen. Accountability from within the system. Senior military officers standing up and saying, no, this is wrong. You've crossed the line. These pieces often blend the fiction with references to real legal proceedings. The newer ones claim court draws the line. Trump faces real consequences, mixing imaginary confrontation scenes with actual court rulings and investigations. This hybrid storytelling blurs the line between commentary and fact, especially when portions circulate on social media platforms stripped of context. People see a dramatic depiction about a general confronting Trump. They do not always catch the disclaimer that it is fictional, and they share it as if it is breaking news. That is the misinformation formula in action. Take real tensions and fears, add fictional dramatic details, present it with urgent breaking news framing, and watch it go viral. But here's why this is being covered. Because even though the specific confrontation is fake, the underlying crisis is real. Trump's relationship with military leadership is genuinely troubled. His threats to use military force domestically are genuinely concerning. His attacks on generals who will not do his bidding are genuinely authoritarian. And the question of what happens if a president demands illegal orders from the military, or what happens when civil military norms break down, those are real constitutional questions America is grappling with right now. So, let us dig into what actually happened. Let us look at the real conflicts between Trump and his generals. Let us examine what Trump has threatened to do with military power and why senior officers are worried. And let us talk about what civil-military crisis actually looks like and how close we have come to experiencing one. So let us start with the real story of Trump versus his generals, because this conflict has been building for years, and it tells you everything you need to know about Trump's view of military authority and constitutional limits. The most prominent case is former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States during part of Trump's presidency. Milley served under Trump from 2019 through the end of Trump's first term and into the Biden administration. And during that time, Milley became increasingly alarmed by Trump's rhetoric and actions around military power, particularly around using the military domestically and starting wars without proper authorization. After leaving his position, Milley spoke publicly about his concerns, warning that Trump exhibited wannabe dictator tendencies and that another Trump presidency could pose serious risks to American democracy and military independence. Those are strong words from a four-star general who served as the nation's top military officer. Wannabe dictator is not casual criticism. It is a former Joint Chiefs chairman saying the president he served under has authoritarian instincts and might try to misuse military power in dangerous ways. Milley did not call Trump a traitor to his face in some dramatic White House meeting like the fictional pieces show, but he did warn publicly after leaving office that Trump represents a threat to constitutional governance and military professionalism. That is about as close as you get in American civil-military relations to a senior officer raising red flags about a commander-in-chief. Because military officers are supposed to be apolitical, they are not supposed to publicly criticize presidents or get involved in political debates. The fact that Milley felt compelled to speak out tells you how serious his concerns were. And Trump's response, he went ballistic. Trump did not take Milley's warnings as legitimate concerns from a career military professional. He took them as betrayal. Trump started calling Milley a traitor publicly. He posted on Truth Social, suggesting that Milley's actions, specifically back-channel communications with Chinese military officials during the chaotic final months of Trump's first term, might constitute treason and could deserve the death penalty. Read that again. The former president of the United States suggested his former Joint Chiefs chairman might deserve execution for treason. That is insane. That is not normal presidential rhetoric. That is a president treating senior military officers like personal servants who must show absolute loyalty and can be executed if they do not. That is authoritarian thinking applied to civil-military relations. Now, let us look at what Milley was actually concerned about, because understanding his fears helps explain why these fictional confrontation pieces resonate. Milley was worried Trump might demand illegal orders. An illegal order in military context is an order that violates the law, the Constitution, or international treaties the U.S. has signed. Officers are taught they have a duty to refuse illegal orders. But what happens when the president, who is the commander-in-chief, gives an order that senior officers believe is illegal? That is a constitutional crisis, because you have civilian control of the military, which is fundamental to American democracy. But you also have the rule of law, which says even presidents and even military commanders must operate within legal boundaries. When those principles collide, when a president orders something illegal, you are in uncharted and dangerous territory. And there is evidence Trump considered or threatened several actions that military leaders believed might be illegal or unconstitutional. First, using the Insurrection Act to deploy active-duty military forces in American cities. The Insurrection Act is an old law that allows the president to use military force domestically in very specific circumstances, like when state authorities cannot maintain order. But Trump repeatedly threatened to invoke it just to crack down on protests and political opposition. In 2020, during protests after George Floyd's death, Trump wanted to deploy active-duty troops in cities. Military leaders pushed back hard. They did not want American soldiers deployed against American citizens exercising their First Amendment rights. That is not what the military is for, and many officers believed it would be an abuse of the Insurrection Act. In his second term, Trump has again threatened to use the Insurrection Act, this time in places like Minneapolis. He suggested deploying troops to deal with crime and immigration enforcement. Senators from both parties have pushed back, with some GOP senators joining Democrats to rein in presidential use of military force without congressional approval. This is a live issue. Trump is actively threatening to deploy military domestically in ways that senior officers and members of Congress believe exceed his constitutional authority. And if he actually gives that order and officers refuse, you have got a civil-military crisis. If he gives that order and officers obey, you have got military forces potentially being used unconstitutionally against American citizens. Either way, bad outcomes. Second, Trump has threatened unauthorized military strikes and wars. There are reports that in his first term, Trump considered strikes on Iran and Venezuela without proper legal authorization or congressional consultation. Under the Constitution, Congress has the power to declare war. Presidents have some authority to use military force in emergencies or to respond to attacks, but there are limits. If Trump orders military strikes that are not authorized by Congress or by international law, that is potentially an illegal order, and senior officers would have to decide whether to obey their commander-in-chief or refuse an order they believe violates the Constitution and the War Powers Act. That is a nightmare scenario for civil-military relations. You are asking generals to choose between their oath to the Constitution and orders from the president. That choice should not have to be made, but Trump's willingness to threaten unauthorized military action puts officers in that impossible position. Third, there is the January 6th context. We know from testimony and reporting that in the days around January 6th, military leaders, including Milley, were deeply concerned about what Trump might try to do. There were fears he might attempt to use military force to stay in power, to stop the transfer of power, to seize voting machines. All kinds of wild scenarios that in normal times would sound absurd, but in the chaos of January 6th seemed disturbingly possible. Milley has described taking precautions to ensure the military would not be misused during that period. And after January 6th, many commentators and some former officials used language like treason and treasonous to describe Trump's conduct that day. The Nation ran an analysis titled 187 Minutes of Treason about the January 6th committee hearings. Former Republican Representative Joe Walsh and others labeled Trump's actions treasonous. This is not generals calling Trump a traitor officially, but it is serious people using that language to describe a president who they believe tried to overthrow the constitutional order. And here is where Trump's own rhetoric makes things worse. Trump has not just defended his January 6th actions, he has glorified them. He has called the rioters patriots. He said he might pardon them all. He has continued to claim the election was stolen, despite every court and every credible investigation finding no evidence of fraud that would change the outcome. And he suggested that people who investigated January 6th or testified against him, including military officers like Milley, are the real traitors. So Trump's position is that trying to stop the transfer of power is patriotic, and holding him accountable for it is treason. That is an inversion of constitutional values so complete it is hard to wrap your head around. Now, let us talk about the practical implications of all this tension. Trump's current administration has reportedly considered recalling retired military officers to try them for treason. Think about how insane that is. Using military justice system to prosecute retired generals for actions Trump considers disloyal. Military Times reported that Trump's defense secretary ordered a treason investigation into Milley and stripped him of his security detail. These are not just theoretical threats. These are actual steps being taken to punish military officers who spoke out or who did not show sufficient loyalty to Trump personally. This creates a chilling effect throughout the military. Current officers see what happens to people like Milley who dare to push back or express concerns, and they learn to keep quiet. That is how authoritarian control of the military develops. You do not need to literally purge everyone. You just need to make a few high-profile examples so everyone else self-censors out of fear. And the fictional pieces tap into all of this. They take the real tension between Trump and military leaders, the real fears about illegal orders and civil-military crisis. The real language about treason being thrown around in both directions, and they create a dramatic confrontation scene that expresses what many people wish would happen. They want to see senior military officers stand up to Trump publicly. They want to see someone in authority call him out for violating his oath and betraying constitutional principles. The fictional general saying, "You betrayed the Constitution, your oath, and your country," is expressing what critics believe, but what no active duty officer can say without ending their career. It is wish fulfillment, It is dramatizing accountability that has not actually happened in real life. But we need to be careful about what we are wishing for. Because while it might feel satisfying to imagine generals publicly confronting Trump and calling him a traitor, that is actually not how civil-military relations are supposed to work in a democracy. Military officers are supposed to stay out of politics. They are supposed to advise presidents privately, follow lawful orders, and refuse unlawful orders. What they are not supposed to do is stage public confrontations with their commander-in-chief or make political judgments about whether a president is a traitor. That is Congress's job through impeachment. That is the court's job through criminal prosecution. That is voters' job through elections. If we start wanting military officers to act as judge and jury on presidential conduct, we are moving toward a different kind of crisis, where the military becomes a political actor deciding who should or should not be in power. That is not what we want either. So, the real story here is messy and does not offer easy answers. Trump has absolutely created civil-military tensions by his threats to misuse military power, his attacks on officers who show insufficient loyalty, and his authoritarian rhetoric about using the military domestically. Senior officers like Milley have absolutely raised legitimate concerns about Trump's fitness as commander-in-chief. But the resolution of these tensions cannot be generals publicly calling Trump a traitor and somehow removing him from power. It has to be through constitutional processes like impeachment, criminal prosecution, and elections. The problem is those processes have largely failed to hold Trump accountable, which is why people are drawn to fictional scenarios where someone, anyone, finally stands up and stops him. So, what does all of this actually mean for American democracy and civil-military relations going forward? Let us break it down piece by piece, because this is where you see the real stakes and where you understand why these tensions matter so much for the future of constitutional government in the United States. First, let us talk about what happens to civil-military relations when you have a president who views military officers as personal servants rather than constitutional officers. Trump fundamentally misunderstands how the military works in American democracy. He thinks that because he is commander-in-chief, generals should show him personal loyalty above all else. He thinks military officers work for him personally rather than serving the Constitution. And when officers do not show that personal loyalty, when they express concerns about illegal orders or push back on unconstitutional uses of military power, Trump treats them as traitors who deserve punishment. This view of civil-military relations is authoritarian. It is how military dictatorships work, not constitutional democracies. In a democracy, military officers swear an oath to the Constitution, not to the president personally. They are supposed to refuse illegal orders, even if they come from the commander-in-chief, and they are supposed to provide candid, professional military advice, even when presidents do not want to hear it. Trump's attacks on officers like Milley, his threats to prosecute them for treason, his demands for absolute personal loyalty, all of that undermines healthy civil-military relations and pushes America toward a more authoritarian model. Second, we need to understand the impossible position Trump puts military officers in when a president threatens to give illegal orders. When he talks about using military force in ways that violate the Constitution or statutory law, officers face a terrible choice: obey the order and participate in illegal action which violates their oath to the Constitution, or refuse the order and face accusations of insubordination or even treason from the president. That is not a choice officers should have to make. The system is supposed to work because presidents, even when they push boundaries, generally stay within legal limits and respect constitutional constraints. But Trump does not. He explicitly threatens illegal actions, and he frames any resistance as disloyalty. So officers are stuck between their oath to the Constitution and their obligation to follow lawful orders from their commander-in-chief. And when those two duties come into conflict because the president is demanding unlawful action, there is no good outcome. Either they violate their oath to the Constitution or they refuse orders from their commander-in-chief. Either way, civil-military norms break down. Third, let us discuss the treason rhetoric and why it is so dangerous, coming from both directions. Trump calls Milley a traitor and suggests he deserves execution. Commentators and former officials call Trump's January 6th conduct treasonous. This language escalates tensions in ways that make resolution harder. Treason is defined very specifically in the Constitution. It means levying war against the United States or giving aid and comfort to enemies. It is not just disloyalty or bad judgment or even serious crimes. It is a very narrow category, and throwing around accusations of treason loosely from any direction makes political disagreements feel existential. If you genuinely believe someone committed treason, the appropriate response is prosecution, not social media posts. If Trump really believes Milley committed treason, he should present evidence to prosecutors and let the legal system handle it. If critics really believe Trump's January 6th conduct constituted levying war against the United States, they should pursue criminal charges under that theory. But just throwing around treason accusations without following through legally, that is performative, that is designed to demonize opponents and inflame passions rather than to actually achieve accountability through proper legal channels. Fourth, we need to recognize what the fictional confrontation pieces reveal about public frustration with lack of accountability. These pieces go viral because millions of people desperately want to see someone